Being enhanced is a lifetime commitment. Once you make that, once you go down that road, there's no going back. What is up, YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Elon Muscular, and this is the new video in my video series entitled My Experience. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my experience with natural bodybuilding. So I've always wanted to look like a bodybuilder ever since I was a kid. I grew up on pro wrestling, and I really was in love with the physiques at the time. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s when I grew up, there was a lot of action figures, there was, pro wrestlers, athletes, they were all jacked. It wasn't like it is today where, they've kind of reduced the size of these images in order to, stop, I guess, kind of body dysmorphia that a lot of guys have. But I definitely had it because I was looking at all these super jacked guys all the time. And for me, that became the picture of masculinity. So ever since I was like 11, 12 years old, the first thing that I wanted to do was go into the gym and learn how to work out. I always saw that as, something that would be a part of my life. I didn't know it would be a passion for me. I didn't know that I would eventually make my living doing this. But all I knew was that I had an internal drive to look a certain way. Now, I started training in the gym at about 15 or 16 years old at my high school gym, and I immediately fell in love with it. I really loved, the feeling of having a pump. And at first, I did it without a structured routine, and then later, I found some great routines on bodybuilding.com that became the foundation of my knowledge of training, and I just put 110% into it, and watching my body transform really gave me a lot of confidence. And at that time, it was around 2010, 2011, and the internet was really starting to become something that everybody spent a lot of time on, and there started to be more blogs. That was like the premier way to get information back on the internet. There was no YouTube channels about bodybuilding. There was barely a YouTube at all. Facebook was new. It was really blogs that had like a lot of the information. And when you were on these blogs, you really got to understand a lot of the message that these people were talking about, because this was long form content that really was able to relay, what was in the head of the author into your head. And I came across this article very early on in my bodybuilding that was explaining that everybody that you look up to in terms of the bodybuilders that you see on the magazines, the fitness models, everybody is taking steroids. And natural bodybuilding is something that, is pretty much an illusion. And yes, you could get in good shape and you can be fit naturally. But if you're going to be a natural bodybuilder, you're always going to have to make the decision between being big or biggish and soft, or super lean and stringy, but you have a six-pack. So I was naturally bodybuilding at the time with this understanding already that there was a limit on it. At some point, the gains would slow down and I wouldn't be able to progress anymore, at least not in a visually appealing way and in a way where I noticed the gains. But the newbie gains were quick and constant, and I felt really good about it at a young age. I felt no need to enhance myself in any way. But in the back of my head, I always knew that there would be a time when I hit that plateau. But years went by and I still did not hit those plateaus. I saw my weights constantly escalating on the exercises that I was doing, and I had so much passion for what I was doing that it didn't matter to me that, some people might have been taking steroids. Now, of course, in high school and early college, you do meet kids that, got juiced up really early and are talking to you about their cycles and stuff like that. But I always viewed that as like just irresponsible use. And I knew that my time would come eventually. So ever since, I started working out, I got in my head, based on reading some forums, that like around 21 was the age that was, that it was reasonable to go that direction and start taking steroids. Nowadays, I would say that that's probably too young, and I would not recommend that anybody actually even start that young if you're not looking to be a professional bodybuilder or anything like that. But that is kind of what I had in my head, so I held back. Now, at this time, there was starting to be a lot of debates about natty or not. And, the forums were always teeming with people arguing about the most famous influencers at the time, like Greg Plitt, Lane Norton. Are these guys natural or are they on steroids? And the thing about back then was there was really no way to know because you didn't have access to these people and all you saw was blog posts or articles. Couldn't really get to know them, you know what I mean? There was no long form content where you really got to understand what these guys had to say. And when you see the magazine pictures of them and the edited videos of them, you know, shot from certain angles, it looks like everybody's on steroids. And me personally never really looked anything like those guys working out naturally, but I just figured that, you know, I had to get older, I had to let my muscle mature and keep training. Now, eventually, I was about 20 years old and I had hit over 200 pounds naturally. I was bench pressing, you know, 300 pounds. I was squatting over 300 pounds and I was pretty comfortable with where I was at. And I noticed that my gains started to drastically slow down. Like the rate that I was gaining before had pretty much completely come to a halt, and I didn't really understand how to continue progressively overloading past the point. And I also noticed that as the weights were still even going up, or I was getting a few reps on my exercises, I wasn't really getting any bigger. Like I wasn't growing like I was before. And at this point I got very depressed and I started to realize that I had kind of reached my genetic potential, that I had to diet down and really see what I built, because up until that time I had been just completely gaining size along my journey and I had never actually dieted and looked at, you know, the results that I got. So after I dieted down, I was about 180 pounds and I was pretty happy with how I was looking, but I noticed that, you know, my delts, they didn't have that look, you know, that traps and delts look that a lot of these guys had. You know, my abs, they had a little bit of fat on them, and when I dieted past a certain point, I would start to look really stringy and not like, you know, the guys online. So I started to clearly see the limitations of natural bodybuilding, and around this time was the time that I started to be exposed to a lot of documentaries such as Bigger, Faster, Stronger, and things like that, where people started talking about the fact that, you know, everyone's on steroids. And there was a big, you know, wave at the time on the internet that everyone's on steroids, nobody's natural. So at that point, I made the decision to start taking SARMs. And I thought that, you know, this could be a potential way to enhance myself without taking steroids. There was a lot of marketing around SARMs around that time. So I had my experience with LGD around that time, 19, 20 years old, where I felt like I had been training for around 3-4 years and I was getting near my natural limit. Now, the experience that I was having does coincide with the research that we have. And we know that people in their first year, you know, it's not uncommon for them to gain 10, 20 pounds of muscle, and then it starts to slow down 5, 6 pounds, 2, 3 pounds. And at around the 4th, 5th year of natural bodybuilding, it's like a pound or less. It's basically like you can't even notice whether you're gaining or not. And it's because the human body has limits. You know, it can only put on muscle to a certain extent. And after that, it doesn't want to store any more muscle tissue. I don't know exactly the science behind why there's such a, you know, extreme cutoff in terms of how much muscle you could put on when there isn't that same cutoff in terms of how fat you could get. You know, fat can be stored, and it seemed like every time that I started to mass past that point, it was just fat coming on and not a lot of muscle. And you can see that with a lot of these natural bodybuilders get pretty fat before they actually cut down to reveal what they built, and they barely put on any more muscle than they did before. So they end up looking bad a lot of the time, soft and out of shape. And this was, you know, completely coinciding with that article that I read when I was 15 years old that was saying that as a natural bodybuilder, you know, you're either stringy and ripped or you're big and fluffy, and I wanted to be both. So my experience with LGD kind of gave me a boost in the right direction, and you can watch that video again here to see the results that I had with that. But at the time I was like, okay, but this isn't unsustainable. This is unsustainable because my testosterone crashed on the LGD. I suffered erectile dysfunction, and I was like, how many times can I keep doing this? I need a more sustainable strategy. And I started to realize that the only sustainable strategy is to, you know, get on testosterone and continue to be on testosterone forever. And I thought I was ready to make that decision at, you know, 21 years old. So I traveled to Thailand. I did my first cycle, and yeah, the gains went well and everything went well. but I wasn't ready to make that, full commitment yet. And I didn't understand really what I was getting myself into. So after that, for a while, I was like up and down. I wasn't sure if I should come off or keep cruising or what. I didn't have a coach because coaches really weren't big at the time, and I didn't have the right information because, like I said, information was hard to come by. So I think that it was a big mistake to stop naturally bodybuilding at 21 years old. I should have just kept up with it until I really had all my ducks in a row in order to go the enhanced path. So my advice for guys right now that are really engaged in natural bodybuilding is take the natural bodybuilding to its natural limit. Definitely. You should never touch anything until you hit that point where you're really stalling with your natural bodybuilding and you get where I was, where you're literally around the genetic limit for your height and weight, which are very well defined at this point. And you don't have to look like, these fake natural guys who are lying about being natural on Instagram. Don't expect to look like those guys because you're not gonna. They're taking steroids and they're lying about it. Just get your height and weight to a point where you're like, okay, I've definitely put on like 20, 30 pounds of muscle more than I did before I started training. But then doesn't mean that you're ready to hop on SARMs or steroids right away. Before you make that commitment to go enhanced, you have to have all your ducks in a row. You need to have the knowledge to be able to create a long-term strategy and realize that being enhanced is not just a cycle. It's not just the cycle that you go on. It's not just the 500 milligrams of test that I pinned to start my first cycle and then for the next 6 weeks. Being enhanced is a lifetime commitment. Once you make that, once you go down that road, there's no going back. The same way that you were born naturally, when you choose to become enhanced, you're changing your biology forever. It's a permanent state. You can think about it like a transgender, for example. Like, let's say I'm a male and I want to become a transgender to become a male to female, right? And I start taking estrogen pills and I start to, grow breasts, my voice becomes higher and I start to have all those side effects and stuff like that. That is the same thing. I'm taking hormones to change my body's biology. There's no going back from that. So you got to make sure that you're psychologically, financially, and lifestyle-wise prepared to go down that path. Just because you hit the natural limit does not give you permission to immediately start taking something else, right? And if you haven't hit your natural limit yet and you start messing around with these things, you're completely delusional and going down the completely wrong path, because I'm telling you, steroids, and being enhanced, it's not gonna, give you the results that you want unless you already know what you're doing and have a solid foundation and a solid plan. A lot of guys end up taking cycles and looking way worse than they did when they were natural, or just looking bad in general. They become bloated, they lose their hair, they get acne, they, get gynecomastia, and they have all these nasty side effects. And if you don't know what you're doing with the training, yeah, you'll put on muscle. I'm not saying that, if you take high levels of testosterone, your body will add muscle mass, but it's not going to look the way you want it to look, right? And you're not going to have the physique like those Instagram influencers who are lying about being natural. You won't look like anything at all. So before you go into the enhanced path, make sure that you have everything straight. Make sure that you really understand natural bodybuilding, because I understood the natural limit, but I didn't understand the natural bodybuilding process. I didn't understand the bodybuilding process. I didn't understand the enhanced bodybuilding process as well as I thought I did. So keep watching videos, keep educating yourself, and make sure that you work with a coach who's already been there, done that, to make that transition. You can hit me up. There's a million different coaches who will responsibly guide you down that path, but there's also a lot of different coaches that will, take this very lightly and load you to the gills just because they want to post a good transformation. And you definitely don't want to go there either. Now, what we've seen from a lot of guys is they start to go from natural to being on TRT, and that is their transition. And they do that with a doctor or through a TRT clinic. I think that makes actually way more sense, because TRT is something that you're going to have to do forever. So you might as well start off with that, see what results you get there. And then if you want to, juice it up past that point, then that is, now you're dabbling in the enhanced realm. But I think going on TRT, because that is what you're going to have to do anyway, is a good, transition point, and one that won't mess up your hormones and get you going all crazy. So that's my experience with natural bodybuilding. As a natural bodybuilder, you will have to always choose between being small and stringy, or big and like a little bit bloated and not so lean. It is what it is, but make sure that you're ready to take the next step before you take the next step. Hope you guys like this video. If you like the video, make sure to comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can see when new videos come out. Like the video, and check out the Bodybuilding Lifestyle podcast, where we have long form conversations, really breaking everything down for you so you can understand the process of bodybuilding and not make the same mistakes that a lot of us made coming up when information was not available. Don't take this stuff for granted, guys. Thank you for watching. Peace.